Allison Schrier, co-founder and president of Zinnia TV, was a caregiver for her husband with dementia, who turned that experience into a career focused on helping both people with dementia and those who care for them. As a dementia educator, Allison taught both family and professional caregivers best practices around supporting people with dementia. As program manager at the University of Washington Memory and Brain Wellness Center, she helped launch and then facilitated a program aimed at helping primary and allied health care providers better diagnose and support patients living with dementia. Allison was honored to be a recipient of a 2020 MODS Awards for Innovation in Alzheimer's Care and was named Visionary Caregiver of 2020 by caregiving.com. She sits on the Health and Medical Subcommittee of the Washington State Dementia Action Collaborative, facilitates support groups for spouses of people with dementia, and lectures on topics about dementia caregiving. Allison, wow, thank you so much for joining our show today.
What a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
What a phenomenal background and career in dementia and caregiving, but I know it did not start out professionally. So let's, for the audience, maybe give a little background on your personal journey and how it got you to this beautiful professional background that you've created.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation to talk about that. So I started off knowing absolutely nothing about dementia. And then in 2012, my husband, who was 47 at the time, was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. So the 6 years leading up to that, it was very clear that there was something was wrong. He wasn't able to keep jobs. He was undergoing a continual and fairly significant personality change just in who he was in the world. But I became his primary caregiver until the time when he moved into long-term care. And he was always geographically very nearby so that we were still able to spend a lot of time together.
That's awesome. I know part of what we're talking about today is that dual identity of parenting while grieving. And so you mentioned when we chatted that your children were 12 and 15 when your husband was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. Can you walk us through what those early days were like for you as a caregiver and as a parent?
I will. Pardon me. So, wow. As I mentioned, there was this period of 6 years before the diagnosis. So from the time that my kids were 6 and 8 until 12 and 15, there was this fuzzy time when who is dad, right? Dad was changing. Dad was becoming difficult. Dad was making terrible decisions. Dad and mom weren't exactly getting along great because he had been misdiagnosed as having adult onset ADHD. And from my perspective, having plenty of people in my life with ADHD, you take your meds, you make lists, you put, you get on with life. And he wasn't getting on with life. And so I was irritated much of the time. And so I think that for my kids, there was this extended period of time where they wondered not just what's going on with dad, but what's going on with my parents. Are my parents going to get a divorce? They don't seem like they're getting along terribly well. Once we got the diagnosis, my relationship with my husband completely changed. And I would say it changed for the better, in that I no longer saw him as an adversary who was very deliberately trying to be difficult. I suddenly got that all of the reasons that he had been responding to the world the way that he had been were because that's what his brain required, right? His brain was the machine driving his actions, and he had no control over that. So that was really helpful for me. At the same time, of course, for the kids to get this news, right? I mean, we went through a period of 6 months where we had finally found a doctor who really seemed to get that there was something more than just ADHD going on, and took us down a path of crossing things off a list, right? Okay, well, it's not sleep deprivation. Okay, it's not a vitamin B deficiency. And when we finally discovered that it was frontotemporal dementia, I remember when we came home and we sat down, the whole family sat down together, and I explained to the kids that daddy has this condition that's going on in his brain. And their question was, well, when's he going to get better? And the answer, he's not going to get better. In fact, he'll continue to change in different ways, but we just have to take those one day at a time. And the recognition, that he wasn't going to get better, and then eventually at some point, the understanding that like, oh, this is going to end in my dad dying as a before I even necessarily get out of like high school or college. So that was just devastating for the kids to hear that. So I would say that very beginning part, like getting up to the diagnosis and getting the diagnosis, was horrible. And we were all numb. We were just numb for weeks, months, just sort of moving in a fog. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that feels like, especially during one's teenage years, right? Those years are they're so chaotic as they are. And then to have to learn and go through something like this is, I'm sure, challenging.
I think so. I think that for kids, especially that time of life, right, tends to be a time when kids want to fit in. They want to be unnoticed, most kids, right? They want to be unremarkable. And so to suddenly be like those kids who had something going on in their family, because we would go out together as a family, we'd go out to meals. My son was a wrestler. We would still bring my husband to wrestling matches. And, he needed there was clearly something wrong with him.
Yeah.
Right. Or having things happen like going to a school play and my son takes my husband to the bathroom and my husband urinates on the floor. And so now my son is there with his high school chums, but he's got to clean up his dad's mess. And, the kinds of things that you just would never wish on a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but you're also going through your grief as the wife and watching your husband go through this. And I think one of the topics we wanted to shed light on was parenting through that grief and how layered of an experience that is. So how did you navigate your own emotional turmoil while trying to hold space for your children's evolving grief as they understood it more and more?
I can summarize it and then talk about it a little bit. And by the summary, I would say not very well. I think that as a parent, you're left with this balancing act, right? Like, I want to cry all the time. I don't want to go grocery shopping. I don't want to cook meals. I want to just sort of like wallow for a while, but you can't. So you're kind of torn. You're in this place where you want to encourage your kids to live their grief. You want to be there to hold them and support them when they're crying and when they're so angry and sad. But at the same time, it's hard to do that when you're experiencing those emotions too and revealing those emotions. And so I felt like, okay, my job is to be the person who steers the ship. I've got to make sure that everybody understands that they're safe, that they're going to be taken care of, that there's stuff going on with their dad, but that their mom is a rock and that their mom is going to get them through this. That is what I saw my task as being. And so the way that I managed my own despair and devastation was to hide it. And so I would go for walks and I would just like weep while I was walking. Or if something happened in the house that was triggering and I just couldn't hold it in, I would say, I'm going to go grab a shower. And I would turn on the water and I would just like sit on the toilet and just cry and cry and cry. Or I would say, you know what, I need to run to the store. And I would just go get in the car and I would just like wail while I was driving my car, because I felt like it would be unhealthy for my kids to see me, what felt like to me, falling apart. I certainly talked about sadness and really tried to help them hold their sadness. I made sure that everybody had a therapist that they could go to every week to talk about what was going on. One of my kids was seeing a therapist twice a week. I made sure that they didn't have to go to school right away. They could stay and kind of find when they felt like they were recharged enough that they could go to school and that I could support them in that, and maybe use some of that time when they were at school to kind of suffer in silence. And I don't know that that's the right way to do it. I think that the kids need to know that there's somebody steering the ship. But I think that they also need to know that it's okay to be sad, because my concern is that by not letting them see me be sad, that perhaps there's some subtle judgment that's going on in the background, like, what's wrong with me that I can't hold it together the way that mom can? So I think that it's really such a balancing act for a parent who is helping children struggle with grief when she is grieving as well.
Yeah, kudos to you for navigating that, and then also being able to reflect on it and understand that maybe it wasn't the best way to approach it, but you did the best you could in that moment, right? With how you could. I know you said you generally tried to hide away to feel your feelings, but were there moments where you felt like you had to choose between being strong and being human, especially in front of your kids? And how did you reconcile that tension in front of your kids?
Yeah, there were definitely times, especially when we would be in public, right? Like we'd be out somewhere and my husband would maybe behave in a way that was wildly inappropriate. And I would have to demonstrate the way that we deal with this that's respectful to my husband and preserves his dignity. But at the same time, like, all I really want to do is like grab everybody and throw them in the car and leave, because it's horrifying. So episodes like going to a family movie in a park and everybody's hanging out watching a movie, and my son in our lawn chairs, and my son says, "Mom," and I look over and my husband is masturbating in public, right? Like, how do you handle things like that gracefully? So I'm kind of straying away from the question, but I think that in terms of times when I felt like I just sort of couldn't handle it, I think that there were definitely times when I did not act skillfully. Right? There are definitely times when I would allow my emotions, and it's more anxiety than the fear, or more anxiety, than sadness, that I on reflection felt bad about times that I let that take over. So I just described a time when I thought I handled things gracefully, that I said, "Hey, honey, that's not okay," and I held my husband's hand. But there were other times when I would say, like, "You can't do that. This isn't an okay thing." And that's not the way that you support a person who's living with dementia. So I tried to model being good, but I wasn't always good.
And that's hard, right? Especially with FTD, it's the presentation is so different from what people understand dementia to be, right? Oftentimes when people think dementia, they're talking about Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's is very different and is often in later ages, right? Older ages. And FTD is with, excuse me, FTD, it often presents in younger people, right? They have young kids usually. They have a job. They have a career they're building. They have a very lively social life. And all of that gets disrupted with this, right? And it is, like you mentioned, it is a progressive downturn. And so navigating all of that stuff in the home is one thing, but then in public is a completely different experience.
Yeah, because people don't get it. And even people who know that your husband has dementia, you're absolutely right, Pooja, that they go to the place of Alzheimer's disease like, "Oh, he must be having trouble remembering things." My husband never had trouble remembering things. Or, "Oh, are you worried about him getting lost?" Nope. His navigation skills are spot on.
Yeah.
And with frontotemporal dementia, yes, there are different variants of frontotemporal dementia. And my husband had something called behavioral variant. And just those words, right? Behavioral variant, it must have something to do with the way that he behaves. And absolutely. And that's what makes it so hard to find a diagnosis as well, is because people typically, when somebody is starting to behave differently, and maybe they're becoming sort of distant and disengaged, maybe they're angrier than they used to be, you don't think brain changes. You think like relationship issues. Is there something going on with the relationship. You think about maybe mental health issues. Are they having some sort of like anxiety disorder or depression? Is this depression? So it's really hard both to diagnose and to bring it out into the world and have people understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first line of defense when these presentations start to change is usually, like you mentioned, depression, right? A lot of times that can present similarly in the early stages. And so it is, for the audience members, it is incredibly difficult to even get a diagnosis for any type of dementia, any form of dementia, but especially frontotemporal dementia, because people tend to be so much younger and so many other variables can be contributing to it that they want to rule everything else out first. You know, there's obviously the side of parenting where you were still very much their mom, right? You still very much had to make sure that you were mothering in your day-to-day while also navigating this entire situation that was impacting your whole family. What was your relationship with your children during that time? And how did you maintain a form of connection that was still like, hey, I'm still your mom, like I'm still here, even with this situation and with this painful chapter?
I think that there were a few ways. I tried as much as possible to convey that we were still going to live a normal life, as normal a life as possible, and we had to figure out what did normal look like in the face of this. And so it meant that my older son would continue going to school and doing the clubs that he did and do college applications eventually, right? And that my younger son would still wrestle and still do the activities that he loved to do. And I made it really clear for them that I am here, like I'm your cheerleader, I'm here to support you. I also tried to make sure that we talked a lot, right? Like, let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about how we're feeling. That definitely got harder over time, especially with my younger son. One of the things that was important, but also very difficult, was to try to help them feel safe and protected from what was going on with dad, and to listen to them. And when they would say, like, I can't do this anymore, to say, okay, then I'm going to do something about it. Like, we are going to do this. We are going to make sure that you stay safe, that you feel comfortable in your own home. Because as my husband's condition progressed, the way that it manifested primarily was in anger. So he would get so irritated by the things that he should be able to do, but he couldn't do. So he was very conscious of the fact that I am a guy who, as a hobby, likes to build personal computers, and I've got all these bits and pieces, and I put them together, and the computers aren't working. The computers aren't working. So he would get so mad because he's a guy who knows how to do this. And similarly with computer games, right? That the kids would play games with him, and they were masters, and he was masters, and now he would go and he'd play this game on his own, and he couldn't do it. And so he would just scream. He would swear and scream. And the kids were the only ones who knew how to help him. I didn't know those computer games. I didn't know how to fix computers. My kids did. So my kids would say, I'll take it. And they would go down, and you would think that what would happen is they would say, Dad, here's what you need to do. If you do this, the guy will be able to get the treasure, and then he can do the thing, and you can win the game. And instead of being overjoyed, my husband would be irate, just so furious that they knew how to do it and he didn't. Going for a bike ride with him, if he lagged behind, he would be furious at everybody else because he's the fast one. He's the one should be in the lead. And so trying to protect the kids. So when we're talking about like communicating with them, making them know that like we're still a cohesive unit, trying to protect them from those kinds of behaviors, in the end, called for my husband moving out of the house earlier than he would have if it had just been the two of us.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, I had to, the kids were falling apart, and no amount of talking and cajoling and supporting was going to help eventually. They had to have separation from the behaviors.
Yeah. And that's a very stressful decision to have to make as well, right? That transition of, where is that line that will result in having to move out of the home, right? And for you, it was your kids, right?
It is. Yeah, that's, even now supporting families when they say, how will I know when it's time to move my loved one to care? And I'm like, if you're asking the question, it's probably already too late. I know that I waited much longer than I probably should have, because I just didn't want to break up the family. I wanted to keep having this sort of the belief that, but we are a family and families live together. Families share a home. And so to pick up one member of the family and say, you can't be a part of this anymore is just tragic. And I so didn't want to go there, but it was watching what was happening to my kids, the unraveling that was happening to my kids. And I knew that if my husband had a logical say in it, he would have said, kids first, right? Take care of the kids. And if that means that you need to remove from the situation the issue, and in this case, the issue being my husband, we had to remove him.
Yeah. Yeah. That's part of, we'll get into this a little bit, but that's exactly why I tell people to start making game plans early on, right? Like as soon as you're an adult, make a game plan for yourself in worst case situation or in a debilitating or devastating diagnosis. Like what are the lines? What are the decisions that you would want people to make, right? So that you can inform them, and then you don't feel like you're having to break up the family. You don't feel like you're having to make a decision that he may not have agreed with because he told you that that's what he wanted you to do, right? It's a really important conversation to start having, and I know that I'm sure in your work you do this a lot too, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, and just hanging on what you just said, I think it's so important for couples and for families to visit the unimaginable. Even if it's like, that won't be us. We wouldn't be a family who gets dementia. I mean, that's what I would have said. But we were. And so I think that you are absolutely right. And this idea of setting up advanced directives, what would I want if I'm the person who gets sick? But for a couple to talk about what would you want me to do if, I think is just really so important.
Yeah, absolutely. You've already shared quite a few situations and scenarios that came up where you had to, that you clearly remember, right? And you really wanted to highlight the realities of parenting through loss. What are some of the moments that you think about the most now when you look back?
Yeah. I think about, because I still see the effects of this in my kids, right? Who are now 29 and 26 and 28, right? I still see how the life that we lived then has impacted who they are now. And I think that one of the things that I still don't know if I was right or if I was wrong was a decision that I made to no longer even bring my husband into the house for visits, because my younger son would always tailspin afterwards. Dad's going to come over. He's just going to stay for a couple of hours. He's going to eat dinner with us. And then my son would disappear. Or he might come down and just say hello and then go away. And then for days, he would be just devastated. And so I still go back there and I think, what could I have done differently? Because it felt so terrible taking that person, my husband, and putting him into a different place, even though he was okay with it, right, at the time. But as he declined and he went from assisted living to memory care, and I really didn't like him being in memory care. I wanted to be able to bring joy into his life. He loved coming home, but I had to just cut that off. Again, going to that, like, we got to make sure that the kids are okay. And so I still go back to that and say, no, I did the right thing. I had to keep my younger son safe. But yet there's this question mark that I have of, but wasn't there a better way to manage it? Should we have, I don't know. So I think that that's probably the thing that I go back to the most is, how could I have handled things differently that could have perhaps preserved more of a sense of family unity, and at the same time still protected my my younger son.
Yeah. Some of those should have, could haves is what continues that guilt that you keep feeling for years to come, isn't it?
I know. And I can talk to other people about this and give them exactly the advice that I give myself. And yet I have a really hard time listening to it. It's hard to let go of that guilt.
Yeah, it is. Guilt is something that I address a lot in our groups and with my clients, and it is hard, and especially if there's other variables at play that add into that guilt too. It makes it extremely difficult to understand that, hey, you did the best you could in that moment given the circumstances, right? We're human.
Exactly right.
So at some point,
well, and can I just say something about that too?
Yeah.
And that is that what I come back to is that if what would be the alternative? If my husband didn't have me, right, then his life would have been absolutely miserable. So me doing the best I can was way better than him not having somebody on his side. So I for what that's worth, I think, well, and I used to tell him, when I would visit him in memory care, and I'd pull him up. He could no longer get up. I'd pull him up, and we'd put on some music, and we'd kind of dance. And I'd say, "You married so well. You really got yourself a good lady, buddy." And he would laugh, and I do think that by and large, I did the best. Not by and large, I always did the best that I could. And so to be able to look back now and say, well, was that good enough? I know it was good enough, right? My brain knows that it was good enough, but my heart still carries this question mark.
Yeah. It's hard being reasonable when you know realistically what you did, right? So at some point, you transitioned this journey of caregiving into becoming a dementia educator and entrepreneur. How did that shift begin for you?
Yeah. I remember really well how that shift began. It was 2017, and my older son was away at college. My younger son had also left for university in September, and my dad was dying. And my siblings and I chatted, and we agreed that somebody had to go be with dad. And I was the only one. I'd had a job. So once my husband moved into long-term care, I had to make money. And so I got a job, and then that I hated. And then I got another job that I hated more. And I hated it so much that I quit. And I thought, okay, I got to figure something out. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I need to do something. And so I was the one who was unemployed when my dad was dying. And so I was the one who went and spent time with him. And I was his caregiver. And so for one beautiful month, my husband was living in long-term care, and I had a person who I would pay to go spend time with him. So I felt like he was covered, the kids were covered. Taking care of my dad was easy. Love him crazy. And I would bathe him, and I would help him use the toilet, and I would rub his shoulders, and I would rub his feet, and I would run my fingers through his thinning hair and kiss him on his cheek. And he at one point grabbed my hands and he said, "You, my girl, I know what you should do for a job. You should do this." And I said, "Be a caregiver?" And he said, "Yes, because you're so good at it." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm good at it because I've been doing it for a long time." And I thought about that. And I thought, okay, yeah, there's no way I want to get a job being like a boots on the ground caregiver. No way. I've already done that. And I can do it for you because I love you, Dad. I don't know that I could do that for somebody who is a stranger. And so I took that home with me after my father died. And I thought, I am pretty good. I'm actually a good caregiver. And I know how to be compassionate and I know how to be loving. And I've started to learn how to do some of the things better that I wish I'd known in the beginning. And I really chewed on that. Like, what are the things I wish I'd known that I know now? And I thought, oh, well, maybe I could help other caregivers who are just getting a diagnosis do things better than I did. So I started studying and taking classes and getting certifications. And that led to me ultimately getting certifications here in Washington State to teach the dementia and mental health classes that are mandated for anybody who works in long-term care. So that's the story, man. It was my dad who caused me to have sort of this light bulb moment and think about this. Previously, my background's in technology, and I taught when I was in the technology world, and I thought, I really like teaching. Like, I actually really enjoy being able to help people do things better. And so once I had the certifications to do caregiving and had a curriculum, I thought, I think I could do this. And I did, and I loved it. I loved teaching.
Yeah, that's awesome. Dads know best a lot of times, right? They read their daughters like no tomorrow.
They do. They know us.
They know. Yeah. What do you say now to other parents who are caregiving while raising kids? Do you run into that often? And especially those who might be feeling like they're constantly falling apart or falling short in both roles?
Mm-hmm. The first thing that I do is I tell them about Lorenzo's house. And so Lorenzo's house, for people who are listening, is a fantastic nonprofit organization that was started by a person much like myself, who had 2 kids, who had a husband with dementia, and who recognized, as I did, that there were just no resources, right? There are no resources for families with kids with dementia. And it's not just about a family like mine, where I'm the mom and my 2 kids and my husband has dementia. But what if I am married and I have 2 kids and my mom who has dementia comes to live with us? How do you help kids be with people who are dementia? And how do you manage that balancing act that we've been talking about of parenting through grief and devastation? And so Lorenzo's house came to be as a support enterprise for families who are going through that. I had searched for support groups for my kids because I can't imagine how I would have made it through this without my support group. But my kids didn't have a support group. They had me, because there were no support groups for kids. Lorenzo's house is support programming for kids, as well as support programming for parents to talk to other parents who are going through exactly the same thing. Fewer than 5% of people who are living with dementia have young onset, meaning like 65 or younger. Mm-hmm. And so as you can imagine, then there aren't really that many families who are raising kids with dementia in the household, more so if it's a grandparent who's come to live with them. Right. And so having a centralized place that we can all go to find that support through Lorenzo's house, I think is just, wow, a resource. Boy, oh boy, do I wish that we'd had that when my kids were little.
Yeah. Support groups are unfortunately not always very accessible, right? Even in big cities, right? You're in a big city, I'm in a big city. We have all these resources at our disposal, but yet access isn't always easy. People don't know about it. People don't know how to access them. People simply aren't even aware that that's an option or something that could help them. And so I'm so glad that you talked about that and offered that up to our audience. How has your relationship with your kids changed as they've grown older and reflected on everything that you all went through together? Like, what does that look like today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish I could say that there was more reflection, because my kids' way of dealing with it primarily is like, that is a thing that happened, and let's just not even go there. Like, poof, we're past that. Don't want to dwell on it. Recently, I went for a walk with my older son, the one who's 28. And I said, I need to ask you a question, because I talk to other families, other parents who have kids with dementia, and I want to understand what I did well and what I could have done better so that I can offer advice to other people. And so I told him my reality back then of being torn between how much do I reveal my emotional strain and how much do I be the person who is the strong person, who keeps her sense of humor up, who remains chipper and who says, cheerio, let's keep this thing going. And I trying to find that balance. And I said, because I really felt that first and foremost, my job was to make you guys feel safe and to feel like you don't need to worry because there's somebody in charge. And he said, you did a great job with that. And I said, thank you. And then he said, I think that it would have been okay for you to share your grief more openly. And then he said, I think there was space for that. Like, I think there would have been space for you to openly cry and openly express your grief as long as you bounced back from it and were still that steadfast person who we knew we could count on. I think that would have been okay. He didn't say, I think that would have been better or I would have been good, but he said, I think that would have been okay. And that would be the advice that I would give people who are in that position now is allow yourself to let down your defenses and cry, because crying is normal and natural. We're sad. Sad things are happening. Hard things are happening. As long as you're able to say afterwards, wow, I'm so glad that I allowed myself to cry and be sad because those are emotions that I'm really feeling. Of course I am. They're normal feelings for what we're going through. Now I'm going to go do the grocery shopping and I'm going to cook dinner and life is going to continue. My younger son, we just don't talk about it. He struggled more than my younger son. I think they're very different people. My older son is more of a like, let's just get her done. Like, let's just do the thing. My younger son is a guy who really feels his emotions very, very deeply. I think that he felt very, very damaged by the experience of going through this with his father. He was quite devastated. And so he's finding his way, but he spent a number of years as like the boy in the basement who smoked a lot of pot. And I eventually had to kick him out of the house and say that I am doing you absolutely no favors by allowing you to be the boy in the basement. And it was scary, and it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And he is doing great. He made it. He found himself. And I know that for many parents who are in that position, there is this, especially if there's any kind of suicidality, like suicidal ideation at all, right? You feel like, but if I do that, if I say that you need to go do your thing, what if the thing that you do is that you take your own life? I get it. It is so, so hard. But the impact of these kinds of like traumas, like having a parent when you're 12 who's diagnosed with dementia, and it's a dementia like frontotemporal dementia, can wreak havoc for a very, very long time.
I'm so glad that you were able to ask your older son for that feedback. I think a lot of times parents don't, I say this as a daughter, not as a parent, but as a daughter, like I feel like sometimes parents feel that I think you mentioned this too, is that your role is just to show us that you're going to keep us safe, right? But in doing that, we also don't see that you're also human, right? That you're also have feelings, that you also can get upset and angry and frustrated and all of these things when it's related to life events, right? Of course, we see it when you're like angry at us, right? Like if you're angry at us or frustrated with us, we'll see that. But if you're frustrated with a circumstance that you have been handed, we don't always get to see that. And then, in our own lives, it shows up later in life where it's like, okay, well, I can't be frustrated with this because I need to handle this way and I need to do, right? And it's some of that emotional processing that doesn't always develop. And so I agree with your son on that. I do think parents should be expressive when they can be. And I think there's more and more research coming out that supports that, about emotional regulation and processing and all of that.
And I think it also gives them an opportunity to practice empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And to recognize that even within the family structure, we support each other. And so maybe if today I'm the one who's sitting at the table crying my cup of tea, that it's okay for a kid to come up and rub my shoulder and say, "It's going to be okay, Mom."
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I agree with you completely.
Yeah. And I'm glad your younger son found his way too. 12 is a very young age to be navigating something so traumatic.
Well, and he has expressed this sort of look at us now kind of attitude, like, look at you, Mom, you're running your own company and I'm doing this and look at us. We like really rose from the ashes. So I do think that there is, if there's any sunshine in part the clouds, what's right? It's the fact that we did it. Like, we survived this, and we came through some really, really hard stuff. And throughout, we retained humor and we retained love. And those things are important.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. So based on what your younger son said, you're up and running your own company. So tell us a little bit about that before we wrap up.
Yeah, sure. So Zinnia TV is the product, Zinnia TV, and it is an app that's a streaming service with research-backed content that is specifically intended to be digestible by and engaging for people who are living with dementia, to be able to give the caregiver moments of respite, to be able to soothe and reduce agitation when people are starting to get a little bit reactive. There are videos that specifically help people accomplish activities of daily living. And so while it is a streaming service for people who are living with dementia, it is a tool for caregivers. And so our thesis really is, he's happy, I'm happy. And I'm delighted to report that when we survey our subscribers, 80% of the family caregivers say that using Zinnia with the person with dementia reduces their own stress. And that's what we're all about, is a tool to help caregivers. So it's something that I wish that I had. And that's what drove me to create it, because I need something that we can watch together that he can actually pay attention to when he can no longer track a plot or tell fact from fiction or process rapidly moving audio and video.
That's fantastic. I can think of so many individuals as an OT who would benefit from content like that. I think that's awesome. Is there anything other than educational content? Like, is it music? Is it movies?
It's really not educational content. So, for instance, there are videos. There's a channel that's just animal videos, a video that's just travel videos. And so people can be like, yeah, but I could find that stuff on YouTube. You can. But ours is like, we create all of our videos to be consumable by people with dementia. But there's also videos about sewing, woodworking, fly fishing, basketball, baking. And so the idea is that by watching these videos together, we can have a conversation about something that is reminiscent for you. And we just have so many wonderful testimonials from people who are like, we thought Mom was nonverbal. Then we watched the sewing video and Mom started talking about sewing. And the ADL videos, it's not the activity of daily living videos. So video like, let's use the toilet, or let's take medication, or let's drink water. It's not that it's so much instructive, like pick up the glass, bring it to your lips. It just shows people modeling the thing that I'm about to ask us to do, so that you're ready for it when we do it. And so what we find is that it increases adherence. So people are more likely to do the thing with less stress and agitation. We do have videos that are specifically caregiver education videos that talk about all of the topics. What do you do around hallucinations? How do you encourage somebody to use the toilet? And how do you communicate effectively? How do you adopt a person's reality? So we do have those as well.
That's awesome. I love how you framed the ADL videos and that it's all based on preparing them for what's to come so that they don't feel like it's an odd request or they might not immediately understand the verbal request. But if they've just seen it, that's a big part of dementia education that we also offer in OT services. And so that's great.
Yay.
Do you work with a lot? Do you happen to cross paths with other like rehab providers, OTs, or anyone?
We do. We have many fans who are OTs.
Yeah.
Because it works really well with the people that they support, right? But they also will report things like, I have this guy who we have him doing a bicycle, and if I put a Zinnia video on about cars, like he's way more likely to stay involved and keep doing the bicycle movement. So we do.
Hey,
we do have
I agree
OTs.
with that, right? If I'm watching a show, I'm going to run the whole duration of the show. If I'm not watching the show,
Right.
I'm only running as far as I want to.
Yes.
If you could, I think that's fantastic. I love that you've built that library of videos for these individuals and their families. I will definitely be checking it out. It's available on all platforms?
Yeah, so it's Zinnia, Zinni, like the flower, and that's where it comes. I'm a gardener, and zinnias grow anywhere, even if it's really icky conditions. So, suboptimal conditions, they still thrive, zinnias. So that's why we called it ZinniaTV.com. And it's a streaming service, and as I said, and an app. So it runs on iOS, Android, Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. Allyson, it has been so great having this conversation with you. If you could leave listeners with one thought on grief, parenting, transformation, what do you hope they take away from your story?
What I would hope that people take away, especially if they are in the throes of this, is that we, and especially our children, are more resilient than we think they are. And that if your expectations are for failure, those expectations will be met. So set your expectations for survival and success. And I believe that those expectations will be met as well.
That's great. Yes, resilience is a big, big factor in how we go through these journeys.
Yes.
Allyson, thank you so much for sharing your personal story and coming onto the show with me today.
My extreme pleasure. Thank you so much.